The sky above planet Zarian was always dark and cold, and the air was heavy like wet metal cloth hanging in space. The alien base stood tall, with black towers that reach high like claws ready to scratch the stars. Inside the training dome, full of glowing screens and humming machines, many young alien warriors stood in a circle waiting for the new subject to arrive. They had heard the news that a human was coming to train among them, and they laughed and whispered because humans were soft in their eyes, slow, and full of emotions. They had never seen one who lasted more than a day in this place. Then the doors opened wide, and a figure walked in slow and steady with a calm face and sharp eyes. It was the human trainee. His name was Lieutenant Rourke, and he had no fear in his step and no tremble in his voice. The aliens looked at each other, and then at him, and someone snorted loud enough for all to hear. A red-skinned cadet called Grivel said in a mocking tone, "Earthling, welcome to the pain room." Rourke said nothing and only looked at the gravity chamber that stood in the middle of the hall. It was round and silver like a fallen moon, and the door hissed open for him like a beast ready to eat. The alien commander Vurox gave the signal with a cold grin. "Put him in and double the gravity right away," he said with his long arms crossed and his golden eyes shining with amusement. The other officers laughed and watched the screens closely, ready to see the human cry or beg or fall. Rourke stepped into the chamber, and the door closed behind him with a soft thud. The room looked empty, with only a floor and a wall and a camera in the corner blinking red. Then the weight began to rise. At first, Rourke felt it in his legs like walking through thick mud, then in his chest like someone was pressing on him, then in his back like a mountain was resting on his shoulders. The gravity was now twice the strength of Earth, and most creatures would fall or break or scream. But Rourke did not fall or scream. He dropped down and began to do push-ups. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 50. The camera caught every moment, and the officers outside stared in silence. He was sweating and breathing hard, but he kept moving like a machine with fire inside. This was not the reaction they expected. Vurox leaned forward and narrowed his eyes. "Is he playing with us?" he said in a low voice. Another officer said he must be hiding the pain, just wait, he will drop. But Rourke did not drop. He stood up slowly and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. Then he looked straight at the camera and smiled. That smile did not show pain or fear or tiredness. It showed something else: challenge, pride, strength. He raised his hand and pointed up with one finger. "Triple it," he said. "Triple the gravity." The room outside fell silent like space with no stars. "Did he say triple?" asked one of the young soldiers in shock. "He wants more," said another with a dry throat. Vurox did not laugh this time. He looked at the monitor with a tight jaw and a growing storm behind his eyes. This human was different. He was not soft or slow or scared. He was made of something they did not understand. Rourke stayed in the chamber waiting for the answer. His legs were shaking a little, and his muscles screamed inside his skin. But he was still standing, still smiling, and asking for more. The aliens did not know what to say. For the first time in years, someone had flipped the game. The test that was made to crush him had only woken something stronger inside him. And the aliens were not ready for that. Not ready for a human who laughed at gravity. Not ready for a man who saw their test as a joke. Not ready for a new legend being born in front of their eyes. The chamber remained still and quiet except for the low hum of power running through its walls like a heartbeat made of machines and metal. Inside stood Rourke, his breath slow, his muscles tight, his eyes locked on nothing and everything at once. Outside, the aliens gathered in a room full of monitors and buttons, their eyes wide, their voices low, their hearts unsure. No one moved to answer his request. No one touched the gravity controls. No one expected him to still be standing. Commander Vurox watched closely, his fingers tapping the console like a rhythm of thought or frustration or disbelief. He could feel the silence growing louder around him, a silence filled with questions and doubt and something new. Respect. Rourke did not speak again. He just waited, and the longer he waited, the heavier the room felt, not from gravity, but from the weight of his presence. Without a word, the scientists activated the next phase, the silent test. Triple gravity would come later. For now, they wanted to study him more quietly, more carefully, more secretly. They would see how long he could last with double gravity, without food, without rest, without sound, without any hint that he was being watched. The lights in the chamber dimmed slightly, the floor shifted barely enough to feel, and the oxygen level was lowered just a little to see how his body would react. Rourke sat down slowly, crossing his legs and resting his hands on his knees like an ancient monk preparing to meditate on the edge of a cliff. He closed his eyes and breathed in the heavy air and let it sink deep into his chest. His heartbeat slowed, his mind cleared, his pain faded into something smaller than a whisper. Time passed like a river flowing through fog with no beginning and no end. 1 hour, then 2, then 6, then 10. No food, no water, no voice, no sound. The aliens outside began to grow restless. One of the cadets said softly he should have passed out by now. Another replied, maybe humans are stronger than they look. Or maybe this one is not human at all. Commander Vurox stayed silent, watching every frame, every movement, every breath. He was not ready to admit it, but something inside him was shifting like gravity, changing direction. Rourke finally opened his eyes, his pupils sharp and alert, his body still heavy but not broken. He stood slowly, each movement controlled, each breath measured, each second carved with discipline. He stretched his arms behind his back, rolled his shoulders, and looked again at the camera. He knew they were watching. He knew they were waiting. So he gave them something to see. He dropped down and began push-ups again, but this time slower, each one deep and full of power, each one a message. I am not tired. I'm not done. I'm just beginning. One of the young alien officers whispered to another, do you think he is doing this to scare us? The other nodded yes, and it is working. In the mess hall, the story of the human spread like fire on dry grass. Some said he was a machine built by Earth. Some said he was a soldier cursed by stars. Some said he was the future. In the training fields, alien recruits tried doing push-ups under double gravity and failed after 5 or 6, falling with red faces and sore bones. They looked at the chamber and wondered what kind of will burn inside that man. In the quiet of the command room, Vurox spoke finally, his voice low and calm. Prepare the triple test tomorrow. The silence broke like glass underfoot. One officer asked, are you sure? Vurox nodded without blinking. Yes, if we wait longer, we lose control of the story. If he wants triple gravity, then he will have it. But if he falls, we remind the galaxy that no human stands forever. And if he does not fall, then we will have to accept what he is. Rourke remained inside the chamber, breathing the thick air, living the weight, sleeping on the cold floor, waking, without complaint, stretching like a man on vacation rather than a test subject. He whispered to himself words no one could hear, words he once learned from an old Earth commander. You cannot break the mountain because the mountain does not care. It only waits. It only stands. And it only rises higher when you try to crush it. The chamber lights flickered once, then returned to normal. Rourke stood in the center of the room, tall and calm and ready. He knew something was coming, something harder, something heavier. He welcomed it, because deep down he did not come here to survive. He came here to show what humans become when pushed beyond the edge. The sun never truly rose on planet Zarian, only a slow glow moved across the sky like a tired ember floating in endless night. Inside, the alien command center lights blinked softly and voices moved like wind between stone walls, quiet but filled with tension. The human had lasted longer than expected, longer than any species ever tested, longer than any prediction in the data logs. Whispers filled the halls like smoke as young alien recruits passed stories to one another, stories about a man who laughed at pain and trained in silence. Commander Vurox stood before the viewing screen, watching Rourke stretch his arms and roll his neck with a calm that felt almost insulting. Beside him stood General Atrix, a veteran of many wars and a skeptic of all things human. This is unnatural, said Atrix with narrowed eyes, his voice like gravel and thunder. Vurox nodded, but did not speak. Then came the voice of Captain Relan, a younger officer known for boldness and pride. He smirked, and said loudly, "I bet he cannot last 10 minutes under triple gravity." Others turned and stared. Triple gravity was not just difficult, it was dangerous. It had snapped bones and crushed spines and melted courage into dust. General Atrix raised an eyebrow and asked, "And what would you wager on this brave statement, Captain?" Captain Relan grinned. "If the human survives 10 minutes at triple gravity, I will eat my armor in front of the entire squad." The room laughed, but Vurox did not. He turned his gaze back to the screen where Rourke now sat cross-legged, breathing slowly, his face still calm, still focused, still undefeated. "Let be done," said Vurox, at last, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Prepare the chamber." The gravity control team received the order with nervous fingers and careful hands. They adjusted the field stabilizers, the pressure regulators, the fail-safes, and the life support overrides. No one had ever pushed a human this far, not even Earth itself. Meanwhile, Rourke stood as the door to the chamber opened with a loud hiss, and a bright blue glow poured in from the outside. He stepped forward without hesitation, as if walking into a cool breeze rather than a death trial. A loudspeaker echoed in the room. "Human Lieutenant Rourke, you are now entering triple gravity conditions for a duration of 10 minutes. Are you ready?" Rourke looked up at the camera and smiled again the same way he did before and said, "Let us begin." The door sealed behind him, the lights dimmed, and the countdown began. 3, 2, 1. Then it hit. The weight came down like a mountain, sliding from the stars, crushing every molecule of space. The floor shook, the walls groaned, the cameras glitched for a moment, and the pressure inside the room grew thick enough to bend light. Outside, the aliens stared at the screen, holding their breath, watching as the human bent slightly under the pressure, his knees dipping, his hands opening and closing slowly. For a moment, it looked like he would fall, and many leaned forward, waiting for collapse. But Rourke did not fall. He adjusted his stance, widened his feet, clenched his fists, and began to move. Each step was like dragging the moon across the earth, each breath a battle against invisible chains, each second a war against pain. He reached the center of the room and stood tall again, his chest rising and falling with effort, but his eyes still burning bright. 5 minutes passed, and Captain Relan was no longer smiling. 7 minutes, and the room grew cold with fear, not for Rourke, but for themselves. This man, this human, was not breaking. He was becoming something more, something terrifying, something beautiful. General Atrix whispered to Vurox, "I think we are witnessing the birth of a myth." 8 minutes, and Rourke was now doing slow squats one by one with perfect form, each one a silent challenge to the galaxy. 9 minutes, and the pressure made even the camera lens tremble with heat, but Rourke kept moving like gravity was just another tool in his training. 10 minutes. The control room erupted in gasps, some in awe, some in fear, some in silence, unable to believe what they saw. The chamber lights returned to normal, the gravity dropped back to standard, and the door opened with a loud hiss. Rourke stepped out slowly, his shirt soaked, his face covered in sweat, his legs shaking slightly. But he was smiling again. Captain Relan stood frozen in place, staring at the screen, his armor still shining, his pride shattered. General Atrix turned to him and said, "I believe you have something to eat, Captain." The room laughed again, but this time it was different. They were not laughing at Rourke. They were laughing with him, or maybe laughing to hide the fact that something had changed in the air. A human had not just survived triple gravity. He had danced with it and made the stars watch in silence. Long before Rourke stepped into the alien gravity chamber, long before the cameras watched him sweat and fight and win, there was another world, another time, another weight on his shoulders. Earth was younger, and his memory filled with orange skies and dusty roads and long shadows across the rocky hills of a forgotten mining town. Rourke was only 13 when the tunnel collapsed and the dust covered the sun and the air turned thick like smoke in a furnace. His father was a miner, strong and proud and silent, a man who believed in sweat more than words and in actions more than promises. When the alarm rang and the others ran, Rourke had run back into the dark, his small hands shaking, his lungs screaming, but his heart refusing to leave. He found his father under a slab of stone, too heavy for a man and too cruel for a boy, and yet Rourke had not stopped. He placed his palms on the rock and pushed with all his fear and love and pain. Something cracked inside him, not a bone, but something deeper, something that never healed. He lifted that rock and dragged his father out, and the miners never forgot, and neither did he. He learned that day that gravity was not just force, it was a teacher, a rival, a partner, in every step. Back in the present, Rourke stood alone in his assigned room. Within the alien base, the walls dark and silent, the lights low, like twilight resting on steel. He sat on the floor, eyes closed, breathing slow, his body sore, his skin marked, but his spirit untouched. The aliens had started calling him by a new name now, Gravemaster. It was spoken with awe and fear and quiet respect. In the mess hall, soldiers gathered not to eat, but to talk about him, to whisper, to guess, to wonder. Some said he had no bones, only iron rods under his skin. Others believed he was half machine, half myth, born in the fires of Earth's core. But a few had started to believe the truth, that he was simply a man with no limits in his mind. Commander Vurox sat alone in the observation room, watching old footage of Rourke inside the chamber, frame by frame, moment by moment, trying to understand. He rewound the part where Rourke stumbled and then rose again, over and over, his mind searching for weakness and finding none. General Atrix joined him and placed a data crystal on the console. This is his Earth file, everything we could find, every mission, every record, every scan. Vurox inserted the crystal, and the screen filled with lines of text and images and dates. Rourke had trained in high-gravity pits, in deep-sea towers, in orbit gyms with zero support. He had climbed mountains with broken ribs and run deserts with no water. He had survived things that broke others, and he had never asked for medals or praise. He had only asked for more. More pressure, more weight, more challenge. Back in the training halls, alien cadets began mimicking his exercises, adding weights to their arms, lowering oxygen levels, timing their breath. Rourke had become something more than a trainee. He had become a standard. Even the trainers started to change their routines, whispering what would the human do before designing a drill. Some were angry, some jealous, some proud. But all were watching, and Rourke knew it. He could feel the eyes not just through cameras, but in the air, in the silence, in the way doors opened a little faster when he walked by. He did not smile, he did not gloat, he did not speak more than needed. But when he walked like gravity owed him respect. He moved like he carried something bigger than his body, a story, a purpose, a weight no one else could see. The alien scientist requested another scan, a full body check, to see what made him different. He agreed and sat quietly as they scanned his bones and muscles and nerves. The results showed nothing unusual, only human, only flesh and blood. One scientist dropped her tablet and whispered, then, "Why does he not break? Why does he not stop?" In a dark corner of the base, an old soldier named Can watched the footage in silence, his three arms crossed, his face unreadable. He had seen many battles, many heroes, many deaths. But never this. Never a man who turned a torture chamber into a training room. Never a human who rose stronger with every strike from the universe. He looked at the screen and said softly to himself, "He is not fighting us. He is fighting something else, something bigger. And he is winning." Rourke lay on the cold floor that night, staring at the ceiling with eyes wide open, listening to his own breath, feeling the ache in his bones, the tightness in his chest, the calm in his heart. He whispered to the air a name, a memory, a promise. And then he closed his eyes and slept like a man who knew tomorrow would ask more from him. And he would give it. The morning air on planet Zarian was colder than usual, and the sky above the base had a strange color like ash floating through blue fire, and everything around the training dome felt heavier, not just the gravity, but something else, something waiting. Inside the central hall, the alien officers stood in silence, their faces tight, their arms folded, their thoughts like thunder behind their eyes. Commander Vurox stood at the front, his voice sharper than before, colder than stone, when he said, "Prepare the chamber again." This time no observers, no cheering, no distractions, only the test and the truth. The gravity would rise beyond safe levels, beyond protocol, beyond reason. This time it would be personal. Because Commander Vurox had seen too much, had heard too many whispers, had watched too many young soldiers talk about the human like he was a legend. He needed to end it. Rourke entered the hall without hesitation, his uniform slightly torn from past drills. His eyes focused, his walk slow and steady like a man already carrying a mountain on his back. He did not look at anyone, he did not speak, he simply walked to the chamber and waited for the door to open. The metal slid apart with a hiss, and he stepped inside, once more the silence behind him thick with tension. Inside the room the lights dimmed, and the floor hummed, and the walls tightened like the lungs of a beast about to roar. Outside in the control room, Commander Vurox gave the order. Increase gravity to 4 times Earth. The technicians froze for a moment, their fingers hovering, their voices caught. That is beyond the limit, sir, one of them said, his tone unsure. Do it, said Vurox without blinking. And so they did. The gravity rose like a wave of fire, invisible, but crushing. It hit Rourke all at once. His knees buckled, and he dropped to the floor, one leg forward, one arm pressed down, his face locked in pain. It was the first time he had fallen. The first time the cameras caught his body failing to stand. The room outside remained frozen. No one cheered, no one smiled. This was not a test anymore, it was something else. Rourke stayed there on one knee, his breath coming in sharp waves, his back arched, his hands digging into the floor. But his eyes were open. He was still conscious, still fighting. Minutes passed like years, each second dragging him closer to the edge. Inside his mind, the memories came rushing like fire through dry grass. The tunnel, the weight, his father's voice, the stone on his chest. The day he became something else. The day he learned that pain was not the enemy, only weakness was. With a deep breath that sounded more like a growl, Rourke moved. Slowly, painfully. He lifted his head, then his shoulders, then 1 foot flat on the floor. His muscles screamed, his bones begged, but his mind only said one thing. Stand. And he did. 1 inch at a time, 1 breath at a time. He rose from the floor and stood upright under 4 times gravity, with blood dripping from his nose and sweat pouring from his hair and his heart beating like war drums in a storm. He raised 1 arm and pointed at the ceiling like before, but he did not speak. He just smiled. The control room was silent, even Vurox did not speak. Because what they saw was no longer just a man surviving pressure. It was a man bending reality with will. Outside the chamber, young recruits had gathered, quietly peeking through the windows, hiding behind walls, afraid to be caught, but unable to look away. They saw Rourke not as a human, but as a force. Something more than muscle and bone. Something that did not break. Inside the chamber, Rourke closed his eyes and whispered to himself the words he always kept buried. I'm not done. The gravity was lowered slowly, inch by inch, the system cooling, the pressure fading, the danger passing. The chamber door opened with a soft breath, like a sigh of respect. Rourke stepped out, slow but upright each step, leaving a dark mark of blood and sweat on the floor. Vurox stood, waiting, his face hard, but his eyes uncertain. Rourke stopped in front of him and said nothing. They stared at each other, 2 soldiers from 2 worlds, one holding a command, the other holding a legend. Vurox turned away without a word and walked back into the shadows of the hall. The recruits parted as Rourke passed them. None dared speak, none dared move. He reached his quarters, sat down on the floor, and let the silence wash over him like water after flame. His body ached, his muscles twitched, his vision blurred, but inside he felt peace. Because he had reached the breaking point. And he did not break. Words spread like lightning through the metallic halls of the alien base, and it carried the weight of truth and the fire of disbelief, and every cadet, every soldier, every officer now spoke the name Rourke with a different tone. The gravity tests had never been passed like this, never been endured without screaming, without surrender, without the chamber turning into a grave. But the human had stood where none could stand, and now the entire base moved differently, as if the gravity outside the chamber had shifted too. In the dining hall, silence followed Rourke's footsteps. Where once there was laughter, now there was awe. And where once there was mockery, now there was something harder to name. Respect. He ate in silence, drank in silence, trained in silence, and still the eyes followed him, filled with questions, filled with fear, filled with wonder. Commander Vurox watched from above, his arms crossed, his thoughts loud inside his mind. He saw it happening. The change. Not in Rourke, but in his own soldiers. They walked straighter, trained longer, spoke less, argued less. They wanted to be more like the human. It made him uneasy, Not because Rourke was stronger, but because Rourke had taken no title, no command, and still he had more influence than any officer in the room. Vurox called an emergency meeting with the senior command, and the air inside the chamber was sharp like broken glass. "This human is altering discipline," he said without emotion, and the others nodded, unsure of what they agreed with. General Atrick spoke first, and his voice was slow and tired and heavy. "He is not altering discipline, he is creating it. What you see is not rebellion, it is reflection. They see in him what they wish to become. They see a mirror made of pain and will and purpose." Vurox clenched his jaw and turned away. If he stays, the chain of command weakens. He must be removed before this base forgets who leads it. A younger officer dared to speak. "Remove him, and the recruits will follow him instead of us." Vurox gave no answer, only walked out of the room, his mind a storm of orders and outcomes. Meanwhile, in the training yard, Rourke stood at the center with a heavy training suit wrapped around his body and metal plates strapped to his arms and legs. Alien cadets formed a wide circle around him, not as challengers, but as students. He moved slowly, each step firm, each breath controlled, each motion a lesson. They copied him without words, without command, only with quiet effort. Some fell, some gasped, some failed, but they stood again and tried again and again. It was not about winning, it was about becoming. One by one, the cadets started greeting Rourke with a nod, not with pride or rivalry, but with the humility of those who have seen something greater. Vurox stood behind the glass window watching, and his eyes burned. He pressed the intercom and called for the guards. "Bring him me now." Minutes later, Rourke stood before him in the command room, alone and calm. "You are disrupting order," said Vurox, his tone sharp, his eyes cold. Rourke said nothing. "You are not an officer, you are not a leader, you are not even a citizen of this world. Why do they follow you?" Still, Rourke did not answer. Vurox stepped closer, his voice rising. "What are you?" Rourke finally spoke, and his voice was quiet and heavy and clear. "I am the weight they choose to carry." Vurox froze. The words hit harder than gravity. He stared into Rourke's eyes and saw no pride, no anger, only truth. Vurox turned away again and waved him off. "Leave this room. Return to training." That night, the Alien News Network released a story titled "The Human Who Conquered Gravity," and images of Rourke standing inside the chamber with veins bulging and sweat falling and legs shaking were sent across systems. Some said he was a new species, some said he was a weapon, some said he was the beginning of something that could not be stopped. But inside the base, no one needed stories. They had seen it with their own eyes. A man who asked for triple and stood through 4. Rourke sat in his room, polishing his training suit, patching it with care, stitching torn cloth like a soldier repairing armor before the next battle. He heard a soft knock. The door opened, and a young alien cadet stepped in with shaky hands holding a folded cloth. "Sir, I made this for you." Rourke opened it and saw a patch with 3 red lines stitched across a black circle, the mark of triple gravity. He nodded and took it and placed it on his chest. The cadet stood still like a statue waiting for a word. Rourke said only one: "Train." The cadet bowed and left with eyes wide and heart full. And in that moment, Rourke did not need a title or a command or a flag, because true power was not in control. It was in the weight others were willing to carry beside you. The hall was quiet as Rourke stepped onto the glowing platform. His body carried the marks of war, his uniform torn and skin covered in bruises and sweat, but his eyes burned like stars ready to explode. The alien crowd above sat in silence, their many eyes watching, as if they could not believe he had made it this far. The Grand Commander stood from his throne, his arms spread wide, his voice echoing across the steel dome. "You have come far, human, farther than any of our kind believed possible, and yet this final trial will not be passed by will alone. It will break you and crush your spirit, and we will see if your species truly belongs among the stars." Rourke said nothing. He simply looked up at the commander, then at the giant structure rising in front of him. It was the Omega Press, a massive machine built to simulate the gravitational pull of a collapsed star. No living being had ever faced it, and walked away. Not even the strongest warlords of the galaxy dared step into its grip. The crowd gasped as Rourke walked into the core of the machine, his pace slow, but steady like he was walking through a memory. The floor hummed beneath him, the lights flickered, then the machine came alive, and the air began to bend under the pressure. The first level activated, and gravity slammed down like a mountain falling from the sky. His spine compressed, and his ribs felt like they would snap, but Rourke kept walking forward. His boots dragged across the floor, his breath shallow, but his was sharp. More gravity was added, and the pain grew with it. His vision blurred, his heartbeat sounded like thunder in his ears, but he smiled, not because he was winning, but because this pain told him he was still alive and still fighting. The alien spectators began to murmur. They had never seen such defiance, such fire in a being so small. Compared to them, their world had taught them that the weak surrender, but here was a creature who refused to break no matter the cost. Rourke took another step and another, each one a scream in silence, each one a message to the galaxy that humans would not kneel, not even in the face of the impossible. The Omega Press reached its 6th level, and the room began to tremble. The floor cracked, the walls groaned, but Rourke kept moving, his skin turning pale, his lips bleeding, but his spirit shining like the sun. He thought of Earth again, the old fields where he played as a boy, the laughter of his brother the last time he saw his mother's face, and the promise he made to never stop fighting for the right to stand tall among the stars. At level 7, the machine shook violently. Alarms began to sound. Even the engineers did not understand how the structure was holding under so much force, but the human inside kept walking, his knees bending, his back arched, but never falling, never surrendering. The Grand Commander stepped closer, his eyes wide with disbelief, his voice quiet but shaking. "Why do you continue, human? There is no reward waiting for you, only pain and ruin." Rourke looked up with blood in his mouth and fire in his voice. "Because this is who I am, because I will not let you define my limits, because pain is temporary, but pride is forever." With one last step, Rourke reached the core of the machine, the very center where the pressure was strongest, where atoms themselves struggled to hold form, and he stood there breathing, shaking alive. The machine began to collapse. The Omega Press failed, unable to contain the power of its own creation. Sparks flew, metal groaned, and systems died around him. But Rourke stood in the chaos, not as a test subject, not as a broken man, but as a symbol of something greater. The aliens had tried to crush him with gravity. They had tried to mock his strength and turn him into a lesson, but he turned the lesson back on them. He showed them that the human will was heavier than any force they could imagine. The dome opened above him, light pouring in from alien suns, and Rourke looked up, arms wide like wings, catching fire, his voice loud as the wind across the stars. "Is that all you have?" Silence followed. Then one by one the aliens stood in honor, not of defeat, but of awe, of respect earned through fire and gravity and unbreakable will. Rourke stepped out of the wreckage, not as a trainee, not as a survivor, but as something new, a legend carried on the backs of stars and the memory of those who watched him rise. And somewhere deep in the hearts of those who witnessed it, a new fear was born, not of the human body, but of the human spirit. For they had tried to break him, and he had asked for more.